You ever have one of those days where everything you planned just snapped in two right under your hands? That was me in Fallow Ridge, a town I'd never meant to see, stuck on a busted wagon. Put up in the middle of the damn square like some county fair spectacle. Straw on the floor, iron bars rusted all the way through, and inside, a man, barefoot, shirt torn, wrists wrapped tight in rags. Head down so far you'd think he'd forgotten how to look up at the sun, or maybe just decided he never wanted to again. I remember this one boy, real scrawny, tossing a rock at the bars, bouncing back with a clatter, didn't even blink, and all the while, the sheriff, mean-eyed, whittling, leaning like he owned the whole world, didn't give me more than a sideways glance when I asked. What did he do? Sheriff spat and said, "Nothing we can prove." But he won't talk. Showed up out the hills with another man's saddlebag and a gash you could see bone through. So now, he's here for the crowd. Is he dangerous? To who? And the way he said it, like women shouldn't worry unless the thing in the cage had claws. That's when the man finally lifted his head. Not when folks were tossing coins to poke him, not when they nailed up a sign, $10 to touch the beast, like he was less than a mule. Maybe you know what I mean. The only thing I swore I'd never trade, and I held it up to the sheriff. Will this buy what's in that cage? And he grinned, held it up to the light, called it a fine tale for the drunks and gamblers. But in the end he took it, and just like that, the cage door screamed open, metal on metal, and the whole town fell silent. I said to the man, "You can stay or you can go, but you're nobody's now." And for a long moment, he didn't move. Then finally, stiff as winter branches, he stood, sunlight catching on the mess of his hair, beard grown wild, face shadowed but not ugly, just tired. Silent, until I finally asked, "You got a name?" He shook his head, didn't offer more, didn't look ashamed either. For 3 days we rode like that, sharing bread and fire. Camped by rivers and trees where only the crows had anything to say, and every morning, he made sure the wheels were sound, kept his distance, but never strayed far from camp, and one night. And that night, I burned the pouch that used to hold my wedding ring, watched it curl and smoke, and he watched me, not with hunger or pity, but like he saw something worth watching, you know? Something alive. After that, our rhythm changed, little by little, a dance with no music. He'd retie my braid every night, threading it with things he carved, beads of bone, little pieces of bark. And I let him, because sometimes the only way you know someone's real is by what they leave behind. My hair never tangled anymore, and I started sleeping through the night for the first time since the war. Then came the twist, you see. One night, as we sat by the fire, he took my hand, gentle as a prayer, and pressed into it a tiny wooden hand, carved from pine, my own, he said, so I'd remember I wasn't empty anymore. I asked him, "Why don't you ever speak?" And he drew in the dirt. Shapes that told stories, cages, flames, a child crouched by a body. And I understood, some wounds don't heal, they just get quieter. We made it to the next town, bigger, busier, and I'll never forget. People whispered, of course, wondered why a woman would trade a ring for a stranger, but they didn't see what I did. How he carved memories into wood, how he built fires and trust. One slow movement at a time. As the trail got rougher, cliffs leaning in on either side, he led the way, always steady, and I led him, because trust comes slow, and love, if that's what you call it. I asked him, what name would you take if you could pick? He carved it into a stone. Solon, pressed his hand to the earth, then the sky, then his own chest, earth and light, and I said it back to him. Solon, and in that moment, it felt like the first time I'd ever called someone home. When we reached the homestead, just 2 walls and a roof held together by old dreams, I told him. This was supposed to be my husband's home. Now I think it's ours. And he didn't answer, just tied another bead into my hair, the bark carved with his name. And we stayed, not because we had to, carving little pieces of the world into gifts. And every evening, I'd sit on the porch, my hair long and heavy with beads, and think about cages, how some you can see, and some you carry with you. I never asked what every bead meant. Some nights, he'd leave a note, gone to hunt. Back before dusk, don't wait to live. And I'd walk barefoot by the creek, hair down, beads clinking like secrets, knowing I'd bought nothing but my own freedom, traded a ring for a man who learned how to braid me whole again, one silent, careful strand at a time. So let me ask you, if you'd seen him in that cage, would you have done what I did? Would you have given up your ring, your past, for a chance at something new? Sometimes the only thing that keeps us going is knowing someone else is listening, waiting to hear how we got free. You ever wake up and realize the hardest part of starting over isn't the leaving? It's the staying? Some folks call it settling. But for me and Solon, that first real spring at the homestead was just a kind of holding on. Like we were both afraid to breathe too loud in case the good in our lives might shatter and blow away in the morning wind. The air smelled like wet earth and wild iris. And the old porch creaked under our boots as if it too was surprised to still be standing. Every sunrise came up a little cleaner, the sky wider, and yet, I still checked over my shoulder sometimes, half expecting the past to come riding up the trail, hungry for what little we'd managed to save. We fell into habits, me and him, habits that weren't about duty or survival anymore. But something softer. He'd gather wood in the blue dawn, I'd fix coffee in an old tin pot, and most days we barely spoke. Just worked together in the hush that comes when people have seen enough to know words don't change much, you know what I mean? But it wasn't lonely, not really, because sometimes he'd reach out, almost without thinking, and retie my braid, steady as ever, threading in another bead or sliver of bone, always quiet, always careful. As if each new thing he wove in was another piece of the wall he was building around us, to keep the world at bay. It wasn't until the day the rider showed up, a stranger in a battered hat, that I realized how fragile our peace really was. I was down by the creek, hands deep in the water, thinking about planting beans along the far ridge. Like he wasn't planning to move unless he had to. The stranger didn't even bother to dismount, just leaned over his horse and tipped his hat. You folks know a man by the name of Creel? The question hit me like a slap. Wasn't a name I'd heard out loud in weeks, but it still tasted like fear. I felt Solon's gaze on me, steady, unblinking, and I shook my head just once. No Creel here. I answered, hoping my voice sounded like someone who believed it. The stranger looked from me to Solon, eyes sharp, lingering on the braid, the beads, maybe thinking too much, maybe not enough. But the sketch was clear as the sky at noon. Solon's face, sharp and young, before the scars, the beard, before everything that made him who he was now. The price wasn't high, but it was enough to make trouble for the both of us if the wrong person saw it. I looked at him, the firelight turning his eyes to gold, and asked, "Is this why you stopped talking?" He didn't answer, just reached for the braid and ran his thumb over the newest bead, one he'd slipped in last night, a tiny feather, bone white. I understood. In that way you do when you've carried secrets so long you can't remember a time before. The next morning, I found him gone before dawn, his footprints vanishing into the brush east of the creek. For the first time since I bought him out of that cage, I felt panic rise sharp and cold in my chest. Was he running, or just protecting me? I waited hours, kept busy, tried to ignore the gnawing in my belly, and then, just as the sun reached its highest, he returned, empty-handed but unharmed. He handed me a wildflower, tiny, purple, bruised at the edges. "Why'd you leave?" I asked, more harshly than I meant. He looked at me, then the poster in my hand, then down at the ground. Finally, he traced a line in the dust with his boot, two figures standing together, shoulder to shoulder. I sighed, anger and relief wrestling inside me. "You're not my burden, you know." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the hint of a smile. But peace never lasts forever. The next week, just as we started planting, thunder rolled in from the west, and with it came two men on black horses, spurs shining, guns at their hips. They called out Solon's old name, loud enough for the whole valley to hear. "Creel, you in there? Come out and answer for what you done." I felt my throat close, the memory of that cage pressing at the edges of my mind. Solon stood, shoulders straight, braid tucked tight, and walked to the edge of the porch. He didn't hide, didn't flinch, just waited, like a man who'd already survived the worst thing that could happen. I stepped out beside him, stubborn as a mule, chin up, even though my hands shook. The taller one sneered. "You the woman bought yourself a killer?" I shot back. "I bought myself a man, and he's worth more than you'll ever understand." They laughed, mean and hollow, but I didn't back down. Solon said nothing, but he didn't need to. His stillness was enough to unsettle any man who thought he owned the world. That's when the twist landed. The shorter of the two, mean-eyed and twitchy, hands open, showing he meant no harm. He spoke, just one word, the first I'd ever heard from him, voice rough like gravel, home. The men stared, confused, and in that pause, I felt something shift. Right? When it was over, the two men fled, battered and ashamed, leaving behind more fear than harm. Solon turned to me, bleeding from a shallow cut, and I found myself laughing. Real, hard, unstoppable, because after all that, here we were, two outcasts standing guard over a patch of land that never wanted us, and I'd never felt more claimed in my whole life. That night, as thunder faded and the valley filled with stars, Solon untied my braid, ran his hands through my hair, gentle, like he was smoothing out years of sorrow. Just that silent understanding that sometimes the ones who find you at your lowest are the only ones worth staying for. You'd think that was the end, right? But real stories never end. I wondered, how long before someone else comes looking? How many second chances do we really get before the world calls in its debts? Yet every morning, I woke to Solon beside me, the beads in my hair singing like chimes in the wind, and I chose to believe in the power of choosing, again and again, not just to stay, but to keep building something nobody else could tear down. So tell me, if the world came riding for what you love, would you fight for it, or would you run? Would you dare braid the scars into something beautiful, even if you knew trouble might find you again? Share your story, your fears, your hope in the comments. And if this tale struck a chord, together,